Alright, so this video will be an introduction to liquid simulations with Niagara. I'm already inside of a new level that I created in my VFX folder, and we can right click, new Niagara system, and this time we want to start from a template. So just click next, and then we can scroll all the way down to our 3D liquid templates. And let's just start with the first one, grid 3D flip host. Double click that. Let's just rename it ns underscore hosts. We can drag it into our scene just so you can see what this looks like. Pretty cool. It works right away, and we can just double click to open that. So the reason why it's better to start off with a template and use that as the basis for whatever effect you're creating is because Epic Games has already created multiple user parameters, and they have plugged in a bunch of the settings for us that just make this work right away. There are a lot of settings here that are a bit of a pain to set up completely from scratch. It gives you some comments that tell you what's happening. This grid 3D flip fluid control emitter is creating the water, and then this emitter, the secondary emitter, is creating the splash and foam on top of it. So just like we did with the fire and smoke simulations, we have the emitter summary, which gives us 4 categories of the main settings that we will use to affect how the liquid is behaving. However, inside of the templates, a lot of these settings are replaced with user parameters. We haven't covered user parameters in this course. However, it's just a quick way to access some of the settings outside of the Niagara editor. So if I go into my main level over here and select the NS host, I can click on the component, and here I have a category called user parameters, and this allows me to change some of the most crucial settings directly from my main level editor instead of having to go into the Niagara system and change them over here and keep going back and forth. Right, so for example, it says world grid extend, that's the size of the grid, but it's replaced, which means that I can scroll down here, and it's actually down here as a user parameter. So I can extend the grid, maybe make it 600 by 600 on the X and Y axis, and now I have a bigger pool. Then you can also change the height of the water. So I can set this to just 100, and I'm gonna get less water in the pool. Next, you have this emitter pouring some water in, and that's actually just a regular particle emitter. So if you go under emitter update, you actually have this spawn rate module, and the particles are being born inside of a sphere. So that's under particle spawn. We have the sphere location, like we learned earlier in the course how that works. So if I wanted this emitter to be thinner, I can just lower the radius of this sphere to, let's say, 25, and I have a nicer sort of a water tap emitter. I can also move this emitter around with the offset. So I can move it on the x-axis, maybe set this to -50, and this way it's closer to the middle. I can move it lower, maybe make it just 250 on the Z, and it's closer to the surface. The next thing I want to show you are collisions. So we can just make a new sphere. And by default, the sphere will not collide with the liquid simulation. So we just have to give it that tag again. So you can just select the sphere, search tag, and give it an actor tag. So just click on the plus sign and type collider, enter, and right away it will work, and the sphere is now colliding with our liquid simulation. So I'll just let it settle down, and you can see how it's beautifully moving the water around. Now it's reacting a bit too strongly to the water, right? And here you have the collision velocity multiplier. So I can just set that to 0.5, and this will decrease the amount of force that the sphere has on the water, right? So it's much more subtle, and it's not disturbing the water as much as it was before. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is how to improve the resolution of the simulation, because by default this is pretty low res. So we can change that straight from the user parameters over here. The number of cells max axis, that's actually the resolution. So right now it's 64, which is pretty low. You can set this to, let's say, 200. But now you'll notice that the water keeps gradually lowering, right? The water level is going down. We need to just scroll down, and here you have the pressure iterations. I found that you need to crank this up much higher in order for the water to just stay in place. So actually I'll just do 500. Now it will slow down the simulation, but now we have this perfectly still high resolution body of water. And you'll notice as I move the sphere through it, we're starting to get some much nicer water behavior, and overall it's a much more high-res simulation. Right, so just to recap, it is the number of cells max axis and then the pressure iterations here in the user parameters or up here under the sim tab, cells and pressure iterations. And also if you're splashing around and you feel like some of the water is disappearing, just be aware that by default, if you go under collisions, the plus Z, meaning the ceiling of the grid, is open by default, which means it keeps killing the water whenever it touches the top. So you can just uncheck that. And now all of the walls are closed, so all of the water should remain contained in the grid. The next cool thing I want to show you is that you are actually allowed to affect the liquid with forces. So we can go under our particle update and just click on the plus sign and type force. You can use any force you would like. We can use a vortex force. Now it's gonna give you a warning about that solve forces and velocity module that's missing. In this case, you need to click dismiss issue. If you add the solve forces and velocity, it will mess up your liquid simulation, right? So we're just gonna click dismiss, and you need to make sure that it's sitting above the grid 3D flip module here. And now you can see it's working right away. I can just lower the force amount to maybe 50. And I have the liquid simulation beautifully affected by my vortex force. We can turn that off. So let's search for force and see what else we could use. Maybe a curl noise force. Again, click dismiss issue, move it on top. And we can increase the noise strength to, let's say, 50. And now the liquid is being affected by the curl noise and it's creating some waves. Right, so the reason we are able to do this is because the liquid simulation is actually made up of particles. So if I turn off the mesh renderer and enable the sprite renderer, you can see there's actually a whole bunch of particles that are making up the liquid simulation. So the particles are then meshed to be made look like a liquid. But this is the main difference between the smoke and fire simulations and the flip simulations, is that the smoke simulations are made of voxels while the liquid simulations are made of GPU particles. And that's why you're able to affect them with something like a vortex force, which we are currently not able to do yet with the force and fire simulation. So I'll turn on the mesh renderer again. And let's move over to the secondary emitter, which is taking care of our splash and foam. A lot of the settings here are pretty self-explanatory. You have foam aging rate, meaning how fast the foam disappears. Same for the spray. You have the opacity multiplier here under the spawn. Maybe we can just lower the opacity a little bit. I feel like it's way too white, right? Also, if you feel like the splash and foam particles are way too big, you can also just scale them down under the sprite size over here. So they are controlled on a curve, meaning they have a random size anywhere from 5 to 8. And this scale curve parameter acts as like a global override. So you can make them bigger or smaller overall. So I'll just set this to 0.5 and this will scale down the entire curve. So now the particles still have a range of sizes, but they are much smaller overall. Right, so if I switch back to our level and play with our sphere, I think we're getting a slightly more realistic splash and foam right now, just because the particles are not as huge. And one last thing I want to show you is that you can make the water collide with your regular Niagara particles. So for that we will make a fresh simulation. Let's just turn this off, right click, new system. Let's just create an empty system and I'll just call it NS water, double click. And so to create the water pool from scratch, you can just right click, add emitter, parent emitters, and make sure you unclick library only. That way you will get more options here, and just scroll down until you find the grid 3D flip fluid control emitter. So that's the main emitter that creates the water pool, right? So this one doesn't have all of the user parameters pre-made. So if you go under emitter summary, you still have all of those settings. So the size of the grid, the resolution controlled with the number of cells, the water height. So here you can check use particle collisions, and it's gonna ask you to give it an emitter. So we can just simply make another emitter, just make it our, let's say, fountain emitter. And now you can go back here and just type in fountain. Of course, in order for this to work, this has to be a GPU sim. So switch it over, make it fixed. And now the particles are actually colliding and influencing the water. You know, this is not something that we covered in this mini course, but you can replace these sprite particles with mesh geometry. So they could be pieces of wood, or they could be stones, they could be debris. And you could, for example, have like a ship explode or a house be destroyed, and then the debris will actually influence the water that's next to the destruction or something like that. So I just wanted to give you some ideas. So this was just a quick overview of the flip liquid simulations in Unreal Engine. There's so much more we're gonna do with all of this in upcoming lessons and courses that I'm preparing. So thank you guys again for checking out this training, and I'll see you in the next one.